What happens when a politician who spent 3 years lying to America tries to question the loyalty of a combat veteran who actually served Adam Schiff was about to find out? He came to destroy Tulsi Gabbard's nomination with accusations of Russian influence. He had no idea she had spent weeks preparing a counterattack, documented evidence of his censure, his fabricated intelligence, his alleged fraud. What began as a political execution turned into the most devastating public humiliation Washington had witnessed in decades. The man who built his career on lies was about to be buried by the truth. The California senator sat in his Capitol Hill office that Tuesday morning, surrounded by his most trusted advisors, each face glowing with the kind of anticipation that comes before a political execution. The confirmation hearing for Tulsi Gabbard's nomination as Director of National Intelligence was set to begin in 3 hours, and Schiff had been preparing for this moment like a predator stalking wounded prey. "Sir, CNN is ready with the headlines," his chief of staff whispered, sliding a tablet across the mahogany desk. The pre-written stories were already loaded. Gabbard crumbles under Schiff's questioning. Putin's puppet exposed. The moment Tulsi's career ended. Schiff's thin lips curved into what might charitably be called a smile. For years, he had watched Tulsi Gabbard with the kind of cold fascination reserved for political enemies who dared to challenge the established order. A former Democrat who had the audacity to leave the party, criticize the intelligence community, and worst of all, question the sacred narratives that Schiff himself had spent years crafting. "Finally," he murmured to himself, "I'll destroy this Putin puppet once and for all." His team had spent weeks preparing the assault. They had compiled every controversial statement, every meeting, every moment that could be twisted into evidence of foreign influence. The Syria trip, the Ukraine biolab comments her criticism of regime change wars. It was all ammunition in what Schiff saw as a righteous crusade. The irony was lost on him entirely. "Rachel Maddow wants to go live immediately after the hearing," another aide informed him. "She's calling it the most important confirmation hearing in decades." Schiff nodded, already imagining the accolades. The mainstream media machine was primed and ready. MSNBC, CNN, The Washington Post, they were all waiting for him to deliver the killing blow to Trump's most controversial nominee. This wasn't just about stopping Gabbard. This was about reasserting the authority of the intelligence establishment that Schiff had come to see as his personal domain. He straightened his tie and practiced his opening statement one more time in the mirror. The words flowed with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of political theater. "Today we will expose a nominee who has consistently parroted Russian talking points. Perfect, devastating, unanswerable." He had no idea he was walking into a masterclass in humiliation. As Schiff's motorcade pulled away from his office, heading toward what he believed would be his moment of triumph, the senator's confidence bordered on arrogance. He had done this dance hundreds of times before. The dramatic accusations, the media amplification, the target's inevitable downfall. It was a formula that had never failed him. But Adam Schiff had never faced a combat veteran who had learned to fight back with something far more dangerous than rhetoric. He had never faced someone armed with the truth. 3 miles away in a modest conference room beneath the Russell Senate office building, Tulsi Gabbard sat in perfect stillness. While Adam Schiff surrounded himself with an army of advisors and a symphony of media sycophants, Tulsi faced the coming battle as she had learned to face all battles, with calm preparation, disciplined focus, and an unwavering commitment to truth over politics. She had faced real enemies with real bullets. This would be different. The flashback came unbidden, as they sometimes did. The dusty roads of Iraq, the weight of her medical kit, the sound of helicopters overhead. She remembered the moment she had earned her combat medical badge, not through political maneuvering or media manipulation, but by saving lives under fire, by being present when it mattered most. "Ma'am, Senator Schiff's team has been briefing reporters all morning," her aide informed her quietly. "They're calling this a reckoning." Tulsi's expression didn't change. She had expected this. In her opening remarks to the Intelligence Committee weeks earlier, she had warned them, "You may hear lies and smears in this hearing that will challenge my loyalty to and my love for our country." She had been right. Her preparation was methodical military in its precision. No talking points, no political spin, just facts. Durham report findings, congressional voting records, public statements, everything documented, everything verifiable. Where Schiff brought rhetoric, she would bring receipts. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was a man who had spent years claiming to protect American intelligence while simultaneously weaponizing it for political gain, preparing to question the qualifications of someone who had actually served in the field, actually gathered intelligence, actually put her life on the line for the information that kept America safe. "They're saying you're not qualified," another aide mentioned, scrolling through the early social media chatter. Tulsi almost smiled at that. 20 years of military service, 2 combat deployments, the first woman to graduate as Distinguished Honor Graduate from the Accelerated Officer Candidate School in 50 years. Training counterterrorism units in Kuwait, actual hands-on intelligence work. Compared to what exactly Schiff's countless television appearances, she reviewed her notes one final time, not the kind of notes a politician might prepare, carefully crafted deflections and poll-tested responses, but the kind of notes a military officer prepares before a mission. Clear objectives, accurate intelligence, decisive action. The truth was her weapon, and she knew how to use it. As the minutes ticked toward the hearing, Tulsi remained outwardly calm, but inside something stirred. It was the same feeling she had experienced in combat zones, a sharpening of focus, a clarity of purpose that came when everything was on the line. She knew what was coming. She had watched Schiff operate for years, had seen him destroy careers and reputations with a combination of manufactured outrage and media complicity. She had watched him lie about Russian collusion for 3 years, watched him read fabricated intelligence into the congressional record, watched him claim to have evidence he never produced. And she had watched him never be held accountable until today. She knew what was coming, and she was ready. The heart-centered office building hearing room buzzed with the electric tension that precedes political bloodsport. Every seat was filled. C-SPAN cameras captured every angle. Print reporters clutched their phones ready to tweet the first devastating quote. The gallery thrummed with whispered conversations and barely contained anticipation. This wasn't just a confirmation hearing. This was theater, and everyone knew it. Adam Schiff entered the room like a matador approaching the ring, acknowledging supporters with subtle nods, his expression grave with the weight of his self-appointed mission. The Democratic senators on the committee flanked him, ready to support what they all knew would be a coordinated assault. Tulsi Gabbard entered differently. She walked with the measured gait of someone who had learned to move carefully in dangerous places. No entourage, no theatrical gestures. She took her seat at the witness table with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to hide and nothing to prove except the truth. The committee chairman called the hearing to order, but everyone knew this was really Adam Schiff's show. When his time came, Schiff leaned into his microphone with the practiced intensity of someone who had perfected the art of character assassination. "Ms. Gabbard." He began, his voice carrying the tone of a prosecutor delivering an indictment. "You seek to lead America's intelligence community, yet your own record suggests a troubling pattern of echoing foreign propaganda." The words hung in the air like poison. "You have been called Putin's girl by Russian media outlets. You have promoted conspiracy theories about U.S. biolabs in Ukraine that served as pretext for Russian invasion. You have consistently undermined American foreign policy while serving in Congress." Each accusation was delivered with the theatrical precision of someone who had spent years perfecting this particular performance. Schiff's voice rose with righteous indignation, his finger jabbed accusingly, his expression conveyed the gravity of someone exposing treason. The media ate it up. Phones buzzed with incoming tweets. Headlines began forming in real time. The narrative machine that had served Schiff so well for years was humming at full capacity. "You have shown yourself to be, quite frankly, a walking five-alarm fire when it comes to national security. Your judgment is questionable. Your loyalties are suspect, and your fitness for this position is deeply fundamentally problematic." The attack was brutal, personal, and designed for maximum devastation. It was the kind of assault that had destroyed political careers, ended nominations, and reinforced Schiff's reputation as the Democratic Party's most effective character assassin. But as the echo of his words faded, something unexpected happened. Silence. For 10 seconds that felt like eternity, Tulsi Gabbard said nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't stammer, didn't immediately launch into the kind of defensive response that would have validated the attack. Schiff's confidence grew. He thought he had won. The silence felt like victory. Then Tulsi smiled. It wasn't the practiced smile of a politician or the nervous grimace of someone under attack. It was something else entirely, calm, calculating, dangerous. It was the smile of someone who had just watched their opponent make a fatal mistake. It was a soldier's smile. "Senator Schiff," Tulsi began, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat zones. "Before we discuss my qualifications, perhaps we should examine yours." The shift in the room was immediate and electric. This wasn't going according to script. Schiff straightened in his chair, his expression flickering between surprise and irritation. He had expected denials, explanations, the kind of defensive scrambling that would only reinforce his attack. He hadn't expected a counterattack. "You mentioned Russian propaganda." Tulsi continued, her tone measured but pointed. "That's an interesting topic coming from you. Remind me, who exactly read the unverified Steele dossier into the congressional record?" The question hit like a surgical strike, precise and devastating. For the first time in the hearing, Adam Schiff looked uncertain. That's completely different," he stammered, his usual rhetorical smoothness suddenly absent. "We were conducting a legitimate investigation based on intelligence reports." "Intelligence reports?" Tulsi's eyebrow raised almost imperceptibly. "Is that what we're calling fabricated opposition research now?" The room was dead silent. Even the ever-present murmur of journalists had stopped. This was like watching a surgeon make the first incision, clean, precise, and revealing something that had been hidden beneath the surface. "Senator, you didn't just read those allegations into the record. You spent 3 years claiming to have smoking gun evidence of Russian collusion. You appeared on television 247 times promoting that narrative. You told the American people you had seen proof that you never produced." Each fact landed with the weight of documented truth. Tulsi wasn't shouting, wasn't engaging in theatrics. She was simply stating facts with the methodical precision of someone who had done her homework. "Where is that evidence, Senator?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Schiff opened his mouth to respond, but for perhaps the first time in his political career, he had no ready answer. The tables had turned so quickly that he seemed genuinely stunned. This wasn't how confirmation hearings were supposed to go. The nominee was supposed to be on defense, not offense. The senator was supposed to be asking the questions, not answering them. But Tulsi Gabbard had never followed conventional scripts. "You want to question my judgment," she continued, her voice gaining strength without losing its controlled calm. "You want to question my loyalty, but before we do that, shouldn't we establish your credibility to make such judgments?" Republican senators on the committee were trying not to smile. Democratic senators were looking increasingly uncomfortable. The media, caught completely off guard, struggled to adapt their pre-written narratives to this unexpected development. But this was only the beginning. Tulsi Gabbard did not pause to let Adam Schiff recover. In combat, she had learned momentum was everything. "Let's talk about the Steele dossier, Senator, since you brought up Russian propaganda." She continued, her voice carrying the relentless precision of someone who would not be deterred. "On March 20th, 2017, you read unverified allegations from that document into the congressional record. You knew it was unverified, you knew it was opposition research, yet you presented it as credible intelligence." Schiff tried to interrupt. "The ranking member does not typically—" "I'm not finished." The words were delivered with quiet authority that brooked no argument. Special Counsel John Durham's investigation found that the FBI was unable to corroborate a single substantive allegation contained in the Steele reports. Not one. The Department of Justice Inspector General identified at least 17 significant errors or omissions in the FISA applications that relied on that dossier. The facts came like a sustained barrage, each one documented verifiable, devastating. You knew this, didn't you, Senator? You knew the primary subsource had told the FBI that Steele's claims were based on hearsay and just talk. You knew the infamous Ritz-Carlton allegations were described by the source as rumor and speculation, yet you continued to promote this narrative for 3 years. The room was transfixed. What they were witnessing was unlike anything in recent congressional memory, a complete reversal of power, a systematic dismantling of a carefully constructed reputation. You appeared on Meet the Press and said you didn't regret promoting the dossier because Christopher Steele was a well-respected British intelligence officer, but you failed to mention that the FBI had fired Steele as a source for lying, or that British intelligence had flagged credibility problems with his work. Schiff's face had gone pale. He was gripping his microphone like a lifeline, searching desperately for a way to regain control of the situation. Senator, you told ABC News that the Trump-Russia conspiracy was of a size and scope probably beyond Watergate. You told NBC that you had seen more than circumstantial evidence of collusion. You told CNN there was plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy in plain sight. Each quote was delivered with devastating precision, a masterclass in how facts could be wielded like weapons. Yet when Special Counsel Mueller concluded his investigation, he found no evidence of coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. None. So either Robert Mueller was incompetent or you spent 3 years lying to the American people. Which is it? The silence that followed was deafening. Even Schiff's Democratic allies looked away, unable to meet his eyes. They all knew the truth, that their colleague had built his reputation on a foundation of lies, and now those lies were being systematically exposed. For 3 years you lied to the American people. Tulsi continued, her voice carrying a note of controlled anger that spoke to something deeper than political gamesmanship. You used your position on the Intelligence Committee to spread disinformation that damaged our democratic institutions, divided our country, and undermined public trust in our government. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving Schiff's increasingly panicked face. And you know it. The momentum was building now, like an avalanche, gaining speed and mass as it careened down a mountainside. Tulsi Gabbard had established the pattern, Schiff's long history of deception, and now she was ready to reveal the consequences. "Senator," she said, her voice carrying a note of almost clinical interest, "you mentioned my fitness for office. That's fascinating coming from someone who holds a rather unique distinction in this body." Schiff's eyes darted nervously. He seemed to sense what was coming, but was powerless to stop it. "You're the only person in this room, indeed the only member of Congress currently serving, who has been formally censured by the House of Representatives for misleading the American people." The words hit like a hammer blow. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Republican senators couldn't suppress their reactions anymore. Some shook their heads in amazement, others struggled to contain smiles. June 21, 2023. Tulsi continued with relentless precision. House Resolution 521, the vote was 213 to 209. The resolution specifically stated that you had misled the American people and engaged in conduct unbecoming of an elected member of the House of Representatives. And she had memorized the details, and now she deployed them with surgical accuracy. The resolution noted that for years you abused your position of extreme trust on the Intelligence Committee by alleging you had evidence of collusion that never existed. It documented how you misled the American people through your false claims and brought disrepute upon the House of Representatives. Schiff was stammering now, trying to formulate a response, but Tulsi wasn't finished. Speaker Kevin McCarthy removed you from the Intelligence Committee, stating publicly that you had been lying to the public. Your own colleagues, people who had worked with you for years, voted to formally rebuke you for dishonesty. The humiliation was visible now. Schiff's hands were shaking slightly as he gripped his microphone. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His usual composure, the smooth confidence that had carried him through countless television appearances, was cracking in real time. And when asked about your censure, do you know what you said? You called it a badge of honor. You expressed no remorse, no apology to the American people you had deceived, no acknowledgement of the damage you had caused. Democratic senators were now actively avoiding eye contact with their colleague. The optics were devastating, watching one of their own being systematically destroyed by his own record. So I ask you again, Senator, what exactly gives you the moral authority to question anyone's fitness for office? The question hung in the air like a sword suspended over Schiff's political career. For a man who had built his reputation on aggressive questioning and righteous indignation, he found himself unable to answer, reduced to stammering attempts at deflection. But Tulsi Gabbard was just getting started. The time for surgical strikes had passed. Now came the systematic destruction. Tulsi Gabbard's voice took on a harder edge, the controlled fury of a warrior who had been pushed too far by someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. You want to question my qualifications, Senator? Let's examine qualifications. She leaned back in her chair, assuming the relaxed posture of someone who held all the cards and was ready to play them. While you were making your 247th appearance on CNN, I was training counterterrorism units in Kuwait. While you were crafting sound bites for MSNBC, I was dodging real bullets in Iraq. While you were performing for cameras in television studios, I was saving lives under fire and earning a combat medical badge. The contrast was stark and devastating. On one side, a career politician who had never served a day in uniform. On the other, a decorated combat veteran with 20 years of military service. I was the first woman in 50 years to graduate as Distinguished Honor Graduate from the Accelerated Officer Candidate School. I served 2 combat deployments. I trained soldiers to fight terrorists, real terrorists, not political opponents you disagree with. Each achievement was delivered with a matter-of-fact precision, letting the facts speak for themselves. You've never been shot at, have you, Senator? Never had to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Never had to gather intelligence from hostile sources in dangerous territory. The questions were rhetorical, but they hung in the air with devastating effect. I have. I've seen what real enemies look like, what real threats feel like, what real intelligence work actually entails. It's not performing for television cameras. It's not reading fabricated dossiers into congressional records. It's not claiming to have evidence you've never actually seen. Tulsi's voice rose slightly, the first hint of real emotion breaking through her disciplined control. You trained viewers to believe lies, Senator. I trained soldiers to fight terrorists. You gathered gossip from compromised sources. I gathered intelligence from verified contacts. You've built a career on deception and media manipulation. I've built mine on service and sacrifice. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This wasn't just a policy disagreement or political theater. This was a fundamental clash between 2 completely different worldviews, 2 entirely different definitions of service. So when you question my qualifications, I have to ask, what exactly qualifies you, your law degree, your skill at self-promotion, your ability to convince cable news producers to book you for another appearance? She paused, letting the question sink in. What exactly qualifies you to question my service? The question hit like a physical blow. Schiff visibly recoiled, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his own inadequacy. For the first time in his political career, Adam Schiff had no answer. If Tulsi Gabbard had wanted to show mercy, this would have been the moment, but mercy was a luxury that combat veterans learned to ration carefully, and Adam Schiff had long since exhausted any claim to compassion. Since we're discussing qualifications and fitness for office, she continued, her tone taking on an almost conversational quality that made what came next even more devastating. Perhaps we should address the elephant in the room. Schiff's eyes widened with something approaching panic. He seemed to sense that she was about to deploy a weapon he hadn't seen coming. Senator, are you currently under investigation for mortgage fraud? The question detonated like a bomb in the hearing room. Gasps echoed from the gallery. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Democratic senators looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. On October 16, 2024, Christine Bish and Darren Ellis filed a formal ethics complaint with the House committees alleging that you engaged in a pattern of mortgage fraud, voter fraud, and unlawful campaign filings stretching back over 2 decades. Tulsi delivered the facts with clinical precision, each detail carefully documented and verifiable. The complaint alleges that you repeatedly misrepresented your primary residence across multiple properties and years to gain fraudulent tax and insurance benefits. Under Maryland Code Section 7407C, such conduct constitutes a felony punishable by up to 20 years imprisonment or a $100,000 fine. She paused to let the numbers sink in. $20 million in questionable real estate transactions, multiple states involved, a clear pattern of deception stretching back decades. Schiff was visibly sweating now, his hands trembling as he tried to maintain some semblance of composure. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air, but no words came out. The complaint details how you allegedly claimed different properties as your primary residence for tax purposes, while simultaneously claiming different properties as your primary residence for campaign purposes. In some cases, you were apparently living in one state while claiming residency in another for voting purposes. Each allegation was more damaging than the last, a systematic exposure of the kind of systematic corruption that destroys political careers. So I have to ask, Senator, you question my ethics while you're being investigated for 20 years' worth of potential felonies. You question my fitness for office while facing possible federal prison time for fraud. The irony was crushing, and Tulsi delivered it with the precision of a master surgeon removing a cancer. Should we discuss your pattern of residential misrepresentation, your questionable mortgage applications, your creative interpretations of tax law? By now, even Schiff's staff members were looking away. The Democratic senators on the committee were studying their notes with the intensity of scholars discovering new texts. The media was frantically rewriting their pre-planned narratives. You mentioned Putin's influence, Senator, but isn't the real question whether someone who has allegedly spent decades defrauding the American tax system is fit to question anyone else's loyalty to this country? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Adam Schiff, the man who had built his career on accusations of corruption and foreign influence, sat exposed as someone who had allegedly been defrauding American taxpayers for decades. The hunter had become the hunted, and the transformation was complete. Tulsi Gabbard could have stopped there. She had already destroyed Schiff's credibility, exposed his hypocrisy, and revealed his alleged crimes. But she wasn't finished. She had one more target in her sights, the media machine that had enabled Schiff's deceptions for years. Senator, you mentioned Russian propaganda. That's particularly interesting coming from someone who spent 3 years running the most successful disinformation campaign in modern American history. She pulled out a tablet and began reading statistics with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. 247 appearances on CNN, 138 appearances on MSNBC, countless interviews with the Washington Post, the New York Times, and every other major media outlet. 3 years of claiming to have evidence you never produced, making allegations you couldn't support, spinning narratives you knew were false. The media in the room shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't just an attack on Schiff anymore, and it was an indictment of their own complicity. Rachel Maddow said she had been devouring your book about Russian collusion. She spent 15 minutes reading excerpts on national television. CNN called you the chief congressional prosecutor of Trump. MSNBC treated you as their go-to expert on intelligence matters. Tulsi's voice carried a note of disgust, now the controlled anger of someone who had watched the media abandon their basic responsibilities. Not once did any of these outlets fact-check your claims. Not once did they demand to see the evidence you claimed to have. Not once did they question whether a man who was reading fabricated intelligence into the congressional record might not be the most reliable source on matters of national security. She looked directly at the reporters in the room, making them complicit in their own indictment. You turned the Intelligence Committee into your personal television studio, and they gave you a platform to spread lies that damaged our democracy. You weren't gathering intelligence, Senator. You were gathering television ratings. The accusation hit its target with devastating accuracy. Schiff's entire political career had been built on media attention, on his ability to get booked on shows and generate headlines. Stripped of that platform, he was just another failed politician with a record of deception. The media never held you accountable because you were telling them what they wanted to hear. You were confirming their biases, feeding their narratives, giving them the villain they needed for their stories. Tulsi's voice rose with controlled fury. Together, you created the greatest political hoax in American history. You convinced millions of Americans that their democratically elected president was a Russian asset. You undermined confidence in our elections, our institutions, our democracy itself. She leaned forward, her gaze intense and unwavering. And when the truth finally came out, when Mueller found no collusion, when Durham exposed the fabrications, when the Inspector General documented the lies, what did you do? Did you apologize? Did you take responsibility? Did you show even an ounce of remorse for the damage you had caused? The question hung in the air like an accusation. No, you doubled down. You called your censure a badge of honor. You continued to defend the indefensible. You showed the American people that you care more about your political career than you do about the truth. The systematic destruction was complete. Schiff sat slumped in his chair, a broken man whose carefully constructed facade had been completely shattered. But Tulsi wasn't quite finished. Since you brought up my trip to Syria, Senator, let's discuss the difference between real intelligence gathering and political theater. Tulsi's voice had settled back into its controlled, measured tone, the voice of a professional explaining complex realities to amateurs. I went to Syria in January 2017 to gather first-hand intelligence about the situation on the ground. I met with religious leaders, opposition figures, refugees, and yes, government officials. That's what intelligence professionals do. They gather information from multiple sources to understand complex situations. She paused, letting the contrast sink in. You, on the other hand, gathered your intelligence from a fabricated dossier written by a discredited foreign spy who was paid by political opponents and fed information by a Russian national who the FBI suspected of being a foreign agent. The comparison was devastating in its simplicity. I went to Syria to seek truth. You stayed in Washington to spread lies. I met with sources face-to-face to verify information. You believed hearsay and rumors without question. I applied the standards of intelligence gathering that I learned in 20 years of military service. You applied the standards of television entertainment. Tulsi's voice carried the authority of someone who had actually done the work she was describing. When I returned from Syria, I was criticized for meeting with Assad. But I also met with opposition leaders, religious minorities, and refugees. I gathered information from all sides because that's what real intelligence work requires. I didn't just accept the official narrative, I investigated it. She looked directly at Schiff, her gaze unwavering. You criticized me for seeking truth through direct contact with sources, yet you promoted lies based on third-hand gossip from compromised sources. Which approach serves American interests better? Senator, verified intelligence, or political propaganda? The question exposed the fundamental difference between their approaches, one based on professional standards, the other on political expedience. In the military, we call relying on unverified, politically motivated sources and intelligence failure. In your world, you call it Tuesday morning television. The contempt in her voice was unmistakable now. You want to question my judgment about Syria? Let's examine the record. I said we needed to investigate chemical weapons attacks before taking military action. You said we needed to believe whatever narrative supported your political goals. I said we needed to verify sources and confirm intelligence. You said we needed to accept fabricated dossiers without question. She leaned back, her point made. Who showed better judgment, Senator? The intelligence professional who demanded verification, or the politician who believed lies because they were politically convenient? The silence that followed was answer enough. The systematic destruction of Adam Schiff was nearing its climax, but Tulsi Gabbard had saved her most devastating weapon for last, his own words. Senator, you said I have zero nada zilch experience that would qualify me for the position of Director of National Intelligence. A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth as she prepared to turn his own attack against him. Those are interesting words coming from you. Let's examine your intelligence experience, shall we? She pulled out another set of documents, her preparation evident in every detail. Days served in military intelligence 0, combat deployments 0, time spent in hostile territory gathering intelligence 0, intelligence training courses completed 0, security clearances held outside of your congressional position 0. Each 0 landed like a physical blow, the repetition driving home the complete absence of relevant experience. You've never been shot at while gathering intelligence. You've never had to verify sources under pressure. You've never had to make life or death decisions based on incomplete information. You've never trained intelligence professionals or been responsible for their safety. The contrast with her own experience was implicit but devastating. Your intelligence experience consists entirely of reading briefings prepared by others and appearing on television to discuss classified information for political gain. That's not intelligence work, Senator. That's performance art. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a harder edge. You've never gathered intelligence, never analyzed intelligence, never been responsible for intelligence operations. Your entire expertise comes from your ability to leak classified information to reporters and perform for television cameras. The accusation of leaked classified information hit like a bomb. Several Republican senators sat up straighter, recognizing the serious implications of what she was suggesting. So, when you question my qualifications with your zero nada zilch comment, I have to ask, what exactly makes you qualified to judge intelligence professionals, your law degree, your skill at media manipulation, your ability to read other people's work into the congressional record? She paused, letting the question sink in. I have 20 years of military service, 2 combat deployments, actual intelligence gathering experience, and a security clearance that I earned through service and sacrifice. You have a talent for television appearances and a record of promoting fabricated intelligence for political gain. The final comparison was crushing. You've never risked your life for intelligence. You've never protected sources or methods. You've never been responsible for the safety of intelligence professionals in the field. Your only qualification is your willingness to politicize and weaponize intelligence for partisan purposes. She sat back, her voice returning to its controlled, measured tone. So tell me again, Senator, who exactly has zero nada zilch relevant experience here? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Adam Schiff, the man who had just minutes earlier been questioning her qualifications, sat exposed as someone whose only intelligence experience was reading other people's work and performing for cameras. You mentioned my loyalty to the United States Senator. That's a fascinating topic coming from someone who spent 3 years trying to overturn the results of a Democratic election based on fabricated evidence. Tulsi's voice carried a new intensity, now the controlled fury of someone who had watched democratic institutions be weaponized for political gain. You want to talk about domestic enemies? Let's talk about domestic enemies. She pulled out her phone and began reading from her own social media posts. I once said that people like you pose a greater threat to our democracy than the rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. I was criticized for that statement, but let me explain why I stand by it. The room fell silent, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented. The January 6th rioters were angry Americans who lost control for a few hours. They were wrong, they broke the law, and they were prosecuted. But you, Senator, you spent 3 years systematically undermining the legitimacy of our democratic institutions based on lies you knew were false. Her voice grew stronger with each word. You convinced millions of Americans that their democratically elected president was a foreign agent. You used your position on the Intelligence Committee to spread disinformation that damaged faith in our elections, our intelligence agencies, and our government itself. And the accusation was devastating in its scope. The Capitol rioters threatened democracy for 1 day. You threatened it for 3 years. They used violence and intimidation. You used lies and propaganda. They were stopped by police and prosecuted by the justice system. You were enabled by the media and protected by your political allies. She leaned forward, her gaze intense and unwavering. Who did more damage to American democracy, Senator? The rioters who were immediately condemned and prosecuted, or the politician who spent years spreading lies that divided our country and undermined faith in our institutions? The question hung in the air like an indictment. You accuse me of being a domestic enemy for asking questions about Syria and Ukraine, but what do you call someone who tries to remove a democratically elected president based on fabricated evidence? What do you call someone who weaponizes intelligence agencies for political purposes? What do you call someone who lies to the American people for 3 years and never apologizes? She sat back, her point made with devastating clarity. You want to look in the mirror, Senator, before you start calling other people domestic enemies. The final phase of Adam Schiff's destruction was about to begin, and Tulsi Gabbard prepared to deliver the killing blow with the methodical precision of a surgeon removing a cancer. Senator, you've spent this hearing questioning my credibility, my judgment, my fitness for office. But there's one question you haven't addressed: your own credibility with the American people. She pulled out a final set of documents, the culmination of her systematic preparation. According to the 2021 Edelman Trust Barometer, 56% of Americans believe that journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people. 57% say most news organizations are more concerned with supporting ideology than informing the public. The statistics hit like hammer blows. Why do you think that is, Senator? Could it have anything to do with 3 years of false reporting about Russian collusion? Could it have anything to do with media figures like yourself making claims you couldn't support, promoting evidence that didn't exist, convincing Americans to believe lies? Her voice carried the weight of accumulated grievances. You didn't just lie about Trump, Senator. You made Americans lose faith in their media, their government, their institutions. You convinced people that they couldn't trust anything they were told by anyone in authority. The damage assessment was comprehensive and devastating. Your own Democratic colleagues know you're a liability. Why do you think they removed you from the Intelligence Committee? Why do you think you were censured by your own institution? Why do you think even friendly media outlets have stopped booking you as frequently as they used to? Each question was a knife thrust exposing the reality of his diminished influence. You built your entire career on a foundation of lies, and now that foundation is crumbling. The Durham report exposed your deceptions. The Inspector General documented your failures. Your own colleagues formally rebuked you for dishonesty. She leaned forward for the final blow. So when you question my credibility, I have to ask, what credibility do you have left? Who trusts you anymore? What institution wants to be associated with someone whose name has become synonymous with political deception? The silence that followed was deafening. Your career is over, Senator. Not because of this hearing, but because you built it on lies, and lies eventually collapse under their own weight. Today you're just experiencing the consequences of your own choices. Adam Schiff sat in stunned silence, a broken man whose carefully constructed political persona had been completely destroyed by his own record of deception. Adam Schiff was trapped, and everyone in the room could see it. His usual composure had completely disintegrated. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His hands trembled as he gripped his microphone. His voice, when he finally managed to speak, was strained and desperate. This is exactly the kind of deflection we've come to expect," he stammered, making one last pathetic attempt to regain control of the situation. Instead of answering questions about her fitness for office, Ms. Gabbard has chosen to attack the questioner. But the deflection fell flat. Everyone in the room could see what had really happened: a systematic, fact-based demolition of a politician who had built his career on lies. Even his Democratic allies were abandoning him now. Senator Dianne Feinstein studied her notes with the intensity of someone discovering new literature. Senator Ron Wyden suddenly found his phone fascinating. Senator Mark Warner appeared to be fighting the urge to physically distance himself from his colleague. "Senator Schiff," Tulsi said quietly, her voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence, "I haven't deflected anything. I've answered every one of your accusations with documented facts. The question is whether you can do the same. Schiff tried again, his voice rising with desperation. The American people deserve to know whether their intelligence director will parrot Russian talking points. The American people, Tulsi interrupted, her voice cutting through his desperation like a blade, deserve leaders who tell them the truth. They deserve intelligence officials who verify information before acting on it. They deserve representatives who don't spend 3 years lying to them about fabricated evidence. She leaned back in her chair, assuming the relaxed posture of someone who had already won. What they don't deserve is lectures about loyalty from someone who has been formally censured for misleading them, or lessons about intelligence work from someone who has never gathered intelligence in his life. The media in the room had given up trying to salvage their pre-written narratives. CNN reporters were frantically texting their producers. MSNBC journalists were scrolling through their phones, trying to figure out how to spin this disaster. The Washington Post correspondent looked like he was questioning his life choices. Even Schiff's own staff members were avoiding eye contact, some actually checking their phones, as if they had suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. The man who had entered the hearing room like a predator stalking prey now sat isolated and exposed, a broken politician whose moment of triumph had become his moment of ultimate humiliation. Tulsi Gabbard could have shown mercy. She could have ended the systematic destruction and allowed Adam Schiff to retreat with whatever dignity he had left. But mercy was a luxury that required trust, and Schiff had long since forfeited any claim to compassion through his years of deception and character assassination. "Senator," she said, her voice carrying the finality of someone delivering a verdict, "you've spent this hearing questioning my loyalty, my judgment, my fitness for office, but you've refused to address the fundamental question that underlies all of this." She paused, letting the tension build one final time. "Will you finally apologize to the American people for lying to them for 3 years?" The question hit like a thunderbolt. It was simple, direct, and impossible to evade. After everything that had been exposed, after all the documented deceptions and proven lies, it came down to this. Would Adam Schiff finally show even a moment of accountability? The silence stretched on. Schiff's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His entire political career had been built on his ability to talk his way out of any situation, to deflect criticism with rhetorical skill and media manipulation. But faced with a simple demand for accountability, he had nothing. "I serve America, Senator." Tulsi continued, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years of military service. "I serve the Constitution, the rule of law, and the American people. I don't serve political parties, cable news networks, or my own ambition." The contrast was stark and final. "The question isn't whether I'm fit to serve as Director of National Intelligence. The question is whether you're fit to serve in any position of public trust." She stood up slowly, her movement drawing every eye in the room. "I've answered your questions with facts, Senator. I've addressed your accusations with evidence. I've met your attacks with truth." She looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering. "Can you say the same?" Adam Schiff sat in stunned silence, unable to respond, unable to defend himself, unable to do anything but absorb the complete destruction of his credibility and reputation. The man who had built his career on lies had finally been exposed by simple truth. The immediate aftermath of the hearing was unlike anything Capitol Hill had witnessed in decades. As soon as the committee adjourned, social media exploded. Twitter trends shifted in real time. #Schiff, destroyed #Tulsi, truth #Steele, dossier lies. The clips went viral within minutes. Schiff's stammering attempts at deflection, Tulsi's systematic dismantling of his credibility, the visible moment when his Democratic colleagues began distancing themselves. Even hostile media outlets couldn't ignore what had happened. CNN's headline read, "Explosive confirmation hearing takes unexpected turn." The Washington Post reported, "Gabbard turns tables on Schiff in dramatic exchange." MSNBC, for perhaps the first time in years, was forced to report facts that contradicted their preferred narrative. The Republican senators on the committee were barely containing their satisfaction. Senator Tom Cotton tweeted, That's how you respond to character assassination, with facts and truth. Senator Marco Rubio called it a masterclass in how to handle false accusations, but the most telling reactions came from Schiff's own party. Democratic senators who had expected to participate in a coordinated attack on Tulsi Gabbard instead found themselves trying to distance themselves from a colleague whose credibility had been completely destroyed on national television. Within hours, anonymous Democratic sources were telling reporters that Schiff had gone rogue and that his questioning didn't represent the party's position. Others suggested that he had been poorly prepared and caught off guard. But everyone knew the truth. Adam Schiff hadn't been caught off guard. He had been exposed. The confirmation vote, which had been expected to be close, became a rout. Even some Democratic senators who had planned to vote against Gabbard found themselves reconsidering after watching Schiff's credibility evaporate in real time. Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed as Director of National Intelligence by a margin of 67 to 33, a result that would have been unthinkable before the hearing that was supposed to destroy her career. As for Adam Schiff, he left the hearing room like a beaten dog surrounded by staff members who avoided eye contact and Democratic colleagues who suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. The man who had entered the room expecting to conduct a political execution instead experienced his own political death, broadcast live on national television, witnessed by millions of Americans and archived forever in the congressional record. It was, as one Republican senator later described it, the day Adam Schiff's political career died on live television. The truth, as it turns out, was a force of nature, unstoppable, irresistible, and ultimately victorious over even the most sophisticated political deception. And Tulsi Gabbard, the combat veteran who had learned to fight with facts instead of fiction, had just taught Washington a lesson it would never forget: that reality always wins in the end, no matter how many lies are told to obscure it. The hearing was over, the truth had prevailed, and Adam Schiff would never recover from the humiliation of being systematically destroyed by someone who simply refused to accept his lies. Justice served ice cold by a warrior who had never learned to retreat in the face of false accusations had finally been delivered.